Well, hello everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video. I'm using new products from Simon Says Stamps Out of This World collection that was just released, and I love some of the new layering dies that are part of this collection. What's fun about using layering dies is that you have many options on how you can utilize them. You could cut them from cardstock or some specialty papers, but my personal favorite is using them with inks and coloring them to create different types of shading and dimension and creating a very unique set of images that make a beautiful scene on your card. So I have out on my desk the Layered Dandy Flower and also the Windswept Leaves die set. These are the ones we're going to be using today in our card project. I'll also show you an example that I made at the end of another card that I used the Layered Perky Flower for, but we use the same techniques on both cards, so I'm only going to be showing one today. I'm also going to be utilizing blending brushes from Simon Says Stamp, the small, which is on the left, and then I also have a jar of the detail blending brushes, both in round and flat. I'm going to use positively saturated inks for all of my ink blending. These inks work so well together and create such smooth transitions between the colors. I'm starting first by using Peachy and coloring the outermost portion of my larger petals with that color. Then I brought in Peony and I'm going to use that for the center. I also feathered that out towards the Peachy, making sure I didn't color Peachy all the way so that way I still maintain that beautiful peach color. So both of these flowers have these really cool detail layers that go on top, and I colored those mostly with Peony but added a little bit of Peachy towards the very outermost edges. And finally, I used a little bit of Sunbeam to color in the centers of the flowers. Moving on to the leaves, I'm going to utilize Sprout, Fairway, and also Field. Sometimes I try to leave the die cuts inside of the paper to help me make sure I don't bend them as easily, especially when using a larger blending brush like this one. This is a small blending brush from Simon Says Stamp, and though it is small, it is a little bigger than the die cut, so it has a tendency to want to kind of grab the paper, and you can bend your die cut a little more easily. For the smaller blending brushes, I don't have as much of a problem. Here I'm using one of the flat brushes, and I'm using that to feather in some color from the center of the leaves to the outer edges, but of course trying to maintain that lightest color that we added first so that way we get some shading. To put all of my pieces together, I'm going to use foam squares. I love using foam squares because it adds a little bit more dimension to my pieces, puts a shadow underneath, and just makes them look more realistic. I also do utilize some liquid glue for some of my other elements, like here where I'm adding the center. It's so small, I just used a dot of liquid glue to attach that down. So once our pieces are ready, I'm going to set them aside and work on my background. The background is going to be very simple. I don't want to distract from my beautiful flowers. So all I'm going to do is put a little bit of cadet ink in the two corners of my paper on opposite ends. That's where the flowers are going to end up being. And I'm just going to fade this out to white. This is just a little bit of color for the background. I love using Shimmer Mist from Brutus Monroe. I love using this on many of my card projects, and I'm going to utilize it this time as a splatter for the background. It's going to add a little bit of interest and a touch of sparkle here and there, which makes the background feel more interesting. I'm layering my pieces here onto my background now that it's dry, and again I'm using foam squares for this for a little bit of dimension. I'm putting foam squares in certain places, especially on the leaves, to make them a little bit more higher than other parts. So something like the stem of the leaves is going to actually rest on the card a bit more, but then the leaf that I just put a foam square underneath, that's going to have a little bit more dimension. So it adds a little bit of interest to the card. I also wanted to make sure that I added some flowers on the opposite side of my main cluster. This is going to have less pieces. It's just going to kind of fill in the scene a little bit and balance everything out. We're going to add the sentiment down along the bottom left, so this kind of frames everything up, which is really pretty. Once I have all of my pieces attached, I am going to cut off anything that's hanging off the sides. But do save some of those pieces that you cut off, because I oftentimes find that I want to add a little leaf here or there where I could fill in a spot, such as this place right here underneath the flower. I decided this little green leaf would be the perfect filler for that spot because it felt empty to me. So always save those when you're cutting off your excess that's hanging off the sides. I'll clean up everything else here with my Simon scissors, and then I can work on putting this onto my A2 card. So I did mention I was going to add a sentiment. I'm going to stamp this greeting here from the Simon Says Stamp Here For You stamp set. It's also got coordinating dies. and I'm actually using the sentiment that says "Here for you." I'm stamping with embossing ink onto vellum, and then I'm going to use silver embossing powder to sprinkle over top. I thought the silver would match really nicely with the colors in my card and also go really well with that pearl splatter that we added to the background. I'm going to use a clothespin to help me make sure I don't burn my fingers as I heat up this vellum and set the powder. Now, like I said, there are coordinating dies for this stamp set. This sentiment is pretty simple to cut out, but if you have the coordinating dies, it's really helpful for all the other greetings that are included in that set. To attach my greeting, because this is vellum and you can see through it, I'm trying to hide my adhesive behind the embossing. So I just used a really thin line of glossy accents on the frame, and I'm just going to tuck this very carefully around the flowers. I made sure that this vellum is sitting on top of some of the flowers so it has a place to adhere to. And then the final finishing touch was to add a few sequins. These are really cool. These are an iridescent clear sequins from Trinity Stamps. They're called Moonlight, and I love how they catch the light. Check out that little bit of iridescent as it sparkles. It's so pretty. Now, like I said, I did make another card. This one uses the Layered Perky Flower die, and I did the exact same technique that I used for the card that I just shared with you. The only difference is that I did use a couple of different colors. I used peachy, guava, and also cherry for the flower petals, and then I used the same greens for the leaves. The background utilizes sunbeam and also a little bit of sea foam for a little bit more of a greener touch to the background. I did use a sentiment here from Simon Says Stamp's Elegantly Modern Greetings. This is the hot foil plate, and I foiled that with silver. Using the coordinating dies, I was able to cut that out, so I have a really beautiful greeting foiled onto this card. And then just a few little gems were a great finishing touch to this project. I love how both of these cards turned out. By utilizing my inks and some blending brushes, I was able to create some really dimensional and realistic looking flowers that pop off of these cards. I hope you were inspired by the project that I shared today in the two cards. You don't necessarily have to have these exact dies to create this same effect. All you need to do is break out a few blending brushes and some inks, and utilizing your brushes to help you get some really good shading, you're going to create amazing looking cards. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I'll be back soon to share more with you all. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful day.